So now that the Ahsoka series has completed with its final episode airing a few weeks ago, I thought it was time to take a look into the Ahsoka series as a whole. But when I began scripting and researching for that video, something dawned on me. And that is, Star Wars is basically dead. At least by its own standards. Look, it's not going to come as a surprise to any of you watching this video that Star Wars, much like the MCU, hasn't exactly been traveling all that well over the past 5 or so years. I've at length gone into Star Wars missteps quite a few times on the channel over the past year, and I don't want to be repeating myself, but taking a look into the Ahsoka series on a deeper level than just, what we got in the series itself, I've got to say it's looking really bleak for Star Wars right now. Everything from where Star Wars has been, where it is right now, and where it's going in future, my optimism for this IP is honestly at an all-time low. Despite Ahsoka offering some reprieve from my increasing pessimism surrounding the Star Wars name under Disney's rule. So we're going to dive deep into why the Ahsoka series basically signifies why Star Wars is essentially just dead, despite the show offering some high moments and interesting characters for a change. And also, whether Star Wars can actually return to the heights it once saw. But before we dive into that, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by War Thunder. War Thunder is a free-to-play large-scale multiplayer action game for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Mac. It features ground, air, and naval combat, so it's got all bases covered. War Thunder also features dozens of renowned and prototype vehicles for ground, air, and naval respectively. There are a ton of other really cool features as well, including a unique damaging system, equipment from the 20th century to the present, upgradable vehicles, detailed customization, and a variety of locations to play on, such as forests, deserts, snowy mountains, and more. To top it off, they're always adding new content, including the latest update, Sons of Attila, which added new vehicles, more atmospheric aerial battles, as well as graphical and visual effects improvements. Now you can download War Thunder for free using my link in the description below. All new players, as well as those who haven't played for half a year or more, will receive some special bonuses, such as rentals for the P-40 E1 aircraft and M4 tank for a week, as well as free unique skins for them. You'll also get a special decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, 3 premium vehicles for free, a week of premium account, and some more goodies as well. But make sure you get in quick, as the American vehicle bonus season will end soon, so pick up War Thunder for free with the link below, and a big thank you to War Thunder for allowing me to not stress about copyright strikes. Now, it's obviously no surprise that Disney Plus has been nothing but a disservice for both the MCU and Star Wars. I've said in recent videos that Disney Plus was the worst thing to happen to the MCU, and it is also the worst thing to happen to Star Wars. You could argue the sequels, but that's a topic for another time. Hollywood has of course leaned heavily into streaming with many IPs in recent years in a bid to get with the times, for better or worse. But in that process, it means that content on these platforms have become that very thing. Content. It's no longer a form of expression. It's no longer about creating something because you have a cool story to tell. It's about content. The MCU, I still think, is the worst example of this due to the sheer volume of content released on Disney Plus, but for Star Wars, it's been a little bit different. Star Wars on Disney Plus has essentially been film scripts stretched out to a series length. We've seen this multiple times now, with Obi Wan Kenobi probably being the worst offender. So much so that a fan had to go and edit the series into a feature-length film, and, wouldn't you know it, it was 10 times better than the show. Funny how that works. In the past 4 or so years, Lucasfilm have been hell-bent on sending Star Wars to Disney Plus instead of movie theaters, and it's a major reason as to why the IP is hitting all-time lows of irrelevance despite media still being produced. Season 3 of The Mandalorian, which was their golden goose egg on Disney Plus, had a huge decline in viewership compared to the first 2 seasons, and then Ahsoka doubled down on that and continued the decline in viewership to the point where not even 1 million households clocked into the finale of Ahsoka. Sure, those numbers will trickle up over time, but this is seriously alarming for Star Wars. The fact shows just keep declining should be the indication to Disney to understand what we've all been saying for years. Star Wars needs to go back to the movie theater. The thing about Star Wars is it just works better when it feels like an event. Now say what you want about the sequels, but remember Force Awakens, remember The Last Jedi, even Rogue One. How hype was that? Where is that today? It doesn't exist. Star Wars just does not work as a content farming brand. You can't just churn out endless shit on streaming platforms and expect fans to turn up in droves forever. Look, Star Wars has always had a pretty strange fandom. They just don't seem to operate like many others, and I say that as someone who's within that fandom, obviously. But the MCU might get away with high viewership numbers after turning out shit endlessly, but Star Wars just doesn't do that. You need to pull back the content and make an event out of major film releases. They have tried to marvelize the shit out of Star Wars in recent years, and it just doesn't work. Why can't we just let Star Wars be Star Wars? Not everything has to be Marvel. I think that is the bottom line, really. Star Wars just needs to return to the movie theater, and Disney need to back off and quit trying to turn it into the MCU and let it be its own thing. So just before we continue on to the meat and potatoes of this video, I never ever do this, so forgive me, but a major portion of you guys are not subscribed to the channel, and it would mean the world to me if you could hit that subscribe button, as our goal is to get as close to or even hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So yeah, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I feel so bad for asking because I just never do it. Thank you guys. Now, I don't think I'm exactly alone when I say that my faith in Star Wars was basically resting on whether or not the Ahsoka series was going to be any good. As a Star Wars fan who would consider Ahsoka to be in probably, his top 3 to 4 Star Wars characters, it's fair to say that I was the target audience for this series. After Deborah Chow basically botched one of my other favorite characters in Obi Wan Kenobi, I really couldn't take another one of these Star Wars series failing to do justice to one of my favorite characters. Granted, that show didn't really ruin Obi-Wan specifically. That show's problems were more along the lines of writing, direction, production design, the important stuff, and of course making Reva the center of attention. Long story short, Ahsoka was a show that I had put every skerrick of remaining faith I had in for Star Wars to be great again. And now that the series has concluded, where has that left me? All over the place, to be honest. Let me explain. I made a video after the first 2 episodes had aired of Ahsoka, and I basically concluded that up to that point, Ahsoka showcased the best and the worst of modern Star Wars. And I still think that rings true now that everything is said and done. But I did notice the further I got into the Ahsoka series that although it had its moments where it absolutely hit home for me, there was a lot that I found lacking. Although I could say I enjoyed the show overall, I was still disappointed. Ahsoka is not the savior of Star Wars that I hoped it would be. I think that's pretty much clear. Whether you look at artistically speaking or you look at the numbers, it's just not the savior that we'd hoped. However, there were things present in Ahsoka that Star Wars has needed for a long time. Good characters, interesting plot threads, some form of expansion of the Star Wars universe, basically everything season 3 of The Mandalorian didn't have. The Ahsoka series in a nutshell is Ahsoka and the remaining crew from Star Wars Rebels, minus Zeb because CGI costs too much, searching for Ezra and Thrawn. In its simplest form, that's what this series is, but it bites off a little more than it can chew in the process. They introduce fantastic characters along the way such as Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, 2 really interesting characters for once with a fresh dynamic, but they kind of forget what to do with them as the show goes on despite how simple the show is at its core. Baylan has about 10 seconds of screen time in the final episode despite being the most interesting character in the show, and in the penultimate episode, Shin is kind of just cast to the side. I think the way these 2 characters were treated at the pointy end of the series was indicative of the show taking on a little too much for its own good despite having such a basic premise. Things were relatively streamlined in those earlier episodes, but then things started getting seriously convoluted the further you got. Plot threads had no payoff, characters were forgotten about, it just got a little bit all over the place. But I think perhaps the show's biggest problem lies within Dave Filoni thinking that everyone has already seen Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars. Now, if you haven't seen Rebels or the Clone Wars, then you are severely out of the loop with this series. For example, Baylan's character is shrouded in mystery with something calling to him, a greater power. Well, you only actually get any payoff if you've seen the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars TV show, which majority of the audience wouldn't have seen. What are these statues supposed to mean to a viewer with no prior knowledge of a specific arc in a cartoon that came out over a decade ago? Absolutely nothing. We're also told that we can't allow Thrawn to come back, and it's built up to be this big deal because it's assumed that the audience knows exactly why he's so dangerous. We don't actually truly get to see why this guy is so dangerous. Because to be honest, his strategies when they attempt to do this in the show fall severely flat. Yes, Thrawn does manage to escape from prettier back to the galaxy that we know, but there wasn't anything along the way that made you go, dude, this guy is smart, he outplayed them, he's a threat, he's dangerous. No, there was nothing like that. The cool, calm delivery of Lars Mikkelsen playing this character doesn't automatically tell the audience that this guy is a force to be reckoned with. You need to actually show it. Yes, Rebel viewers know it, but the general audience does not, and I think Dave Filoni forgets that. And I mean, if that's not enough, the world between worlds. How is anybody who hasn't seen Rebels supposed to make sense of this? Was it cool? Yeah, it was, but without prior homework, it makes no sense. The show doesn't explain anything to the viewer. How is the general audience supposed to know Morai, the owl that follows Ahsoka around? The show doesn't explain it. You don't know. It's all so reliant on past knowledge to make the present make sense, which, you know, it feels rewarding as someone who has seen those shows, but think of the people who haven't. I genuinely feel sorry for the casual viewer because the show does a lot right in terms of actually creating an interesting story and attempting to try something new, but so much of what the show is built on with its story and characters are based on assumed knowledge. And I believe this is a major reason as to why this show had such poor numbers despite it getting so much right. Ahsoka is just not a casual viewer friendly show at all. Like, let's compare Ahsoka to The Mandalorian, which is of course their biggest hit of a show until season 3, happened. The Mandalorian took off because it was easily accessible, it had complex characters, it had a simple story, it had a cute little snot ball. Anybody could watch The Mandalorian and be totally in the loop. Yes, there were Easter eggs for the hardcore fans, but the problem with Ahsoka is the Easter eggs are the main cruxes of the story, leaving casual fans wondering what the hell is going on. But I think I've proven my point here. What does the show actually do well? Well, it used nostalgia pretty damn well, I'll say that much. Seeing Hayden Christensen as Anakin again was great. Was this member berries? Yes, absolutely. But it did serve a purpose. Ahsoka as a character changed drastically through the use of Anakin in this series. So I'm willing to let the member berry slide here as there was actually impact on the character as a result. A lot of the show's core complaints in the early episodes were regarding Ahsoka being a stoic girl boss because girl power, Disney, and all of that. And I completely get it because there are a lot of characters like that, but I never thought this was the case specifically with Ahsoka. I thought there was always a little bit more at play here. I did think she was perhaps maybe a little more stoic than you'd come to expect given her past, but with episode 5 of the series in mind, it does make more sense. After she learns her lesson from Anakin, she's essentially reborn as Ahsoka the White. Now this does seem to complicate things as we already kind of saw her at this point in Rebels, but I'm just gonna let that slide. I think there might have been a precedence taken for live action here. But after that point in episode 5, Ahsoka has let go of her guilt for abandoning Anakin when he needed her the most, which is something she has carried for a long time. She's now wildly optimistic, almost annoyingly so, and she's willing to take her teachings from Anakin into her teachings with Sabine. She completely transforms as a character. But speaking of Sabine, let's talk about this character. I, for one, have never really liked Sabine. I just want to be transparent here. She was fine in Rebels, okay, but I did not like this character at all in Ahsoka. In fact, I actively disliked this character. I found her rebellious nature really annoying, even though I didn't find it that annoying in Rebels. I thought some of the decisions made with the character in terms of being efficient with the Force so quickly was just ridiculous. I thought they were going to take their time with it because she couldn't move the cup straight away, but yeah, they kind of went away with that. Like, I'm fine with her being Force sensitive as she is a descendant of Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi, so I can make my peace with that. But how does she go from not being able to lift a cup to being able to send Ezra flying through the air in a handful of episodes? It's just ridiculous. But to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, I do actually want to bring up a moment in defense of Sabine from this series that a lot of people seem to be pretty unhappy with. And that was Sabine's decision to give the map to Baylan, essentially allowing the antagonist to find Thrawn as a means to see Ezra again. Basically risking the entire fate of the galaxy just so she can see her friend. Now, was she wrong to do this? Yes, obviously, but that's kind of the point. It's the same situation as, say, Star-Lord in Infinity War when he finds out Thanos killed Gamora. He's unable to keep his cool so they can stop him. Instead, he basically sacrifices the entire galaxy because his very human emotions take over. Love is the death of reason. It shows the flawed human side of the character, but that's what they've tried to do here with Sabine, obviously under different circumstances, but it's a ballsy decision, and it's about the only thing in the show regarding Sabine where I actually thought they tried something remotely interesting. What can I say, man? I love when characters are forced into making difficult choices that have a clear, correct answer. Quill keeping his cool against Thanos, Joel saving Ellie, like, you get the idea. Where I think this didn't hit home though is when it comes to consequence. If you're going to play with these difficult choices, the character must face consequences. Sabine doesn't really seem to as a result of her decisions. Yes, she's still in Peridia by the season's end, but they sure seem real optimistic about it, so it kind of just feels like she risked the galaxy for her own selfish desires, but it's okay. I don't know, I just feel like if you're going to play with dilemmas like that, there needs to be consequences. Like after seeing Quill get snapped away or Joel getting tonked down the green, I feel like they missed the mark with a cool idea here. Overall though, Ahsoka, it's a mixed bag. I think it does truly showcase the best and worst of modern Star Wars, and although it had some high points and some really interesting new characters, I found myself by its end a little underwhelmed. Especially considering how high my interest was peaked halfway through the show's run. Seeing Ezra, Thrawn, and Anakin again was cool, don't get me wrong, but member berries can only carry a show so far, and Ahsoka was way too reliant on prior knowledge to keep casual fans engaged. So the future of Star Wars, what does it entail? Where does this franchise go from one of, if not its lowest point to date? That is the question. Well, we know that they don't really have any plans to slow down their content spam on Disney Plus with shows such as Skeleton Crew, which I don't think anybody cares about and is just going to continue the downward trend of Star Wars on Disney Plus. There is The Acolyte, which could be a disaster. It could be really cool though at the same time. That show is going to be very polarizing for the pure fact that Leslie Headland is the director and has made some seriously weird comments regarding George Lucas and Star Wars in the past. And of course, one of the actors went on a tirade about the patriarchy when trying to promote the show, so you know, that's just going to get things really interesting.
In a very woman-centered world, which I was very excited to kind of be in that, because I feel like Star Wars is very like patriarchal, so it was kind of cool to have like this sort of woman-centered figure.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
But on the other side of the coin, on the more optimistic side, it's doing something different, something we haven't seen before, so it could be lightning in a bottle, who knows. But more importantly, after that, Star Wars will return to the movie theater, which is going to be the biggest deal for Star Wars in a long time. James Mangold is handling a film that takes us to essentially the beginning of time in the Star Wars universe, but given how he handled Indiana Jones 5, my faith in this project is a little shaken. Then there's the Rey movie, and yeah, they still haven't decided to stop this after it being pretty obvious that it's a terrible idea. It's not a joke, they're actually going to do it. Yeah, I think we all know how that one's gonna go. And then Dave Filoni will have his Mandoverse movie, which will be the conclusion of shows like Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, etc. And I must admit, I am a little bit interested to see how that goes on a film's budget. So I think it's fair to say that Star Wars is in for a little more turbulence before things get better. I consider myself a pretty hardcore Star Wars fan, and even I can say with full confidence that this IP is just in an absolutely terrible place right now. It's virtually dead, at least by its own standards. And I think it's going to stay that way until Star Wars goes back to the movie theater and it becomes a must-see event once again. The problem is the lineup of films they've chosen aren't really going to be doing it a whole lot of favors. Dave Filoni's Mandoverse movie is going to have required viewing, much like what we spoke about earlier and how that's already a problem. The Rey movie is a disaster in the making, and James Mangold's film is probably the best hope for something new and fresh, let's be honest. But if Disney wants Star Wars back, I think it's time they distance themselves from the Skywalker saga and go into the Old Republic. It's right there for the taking. Just do it. I think everyone can agree an Old Republic trilogy would get us all back in the movie theaters. But yeah, honestly, I just think Star Wars is pretty dead right now, and I think it's going to remain that way for quite some time. If Ahsoka was any indicator, it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better.